And speaking of identical twins and triplets that are raised together versus apart, you write a lot about these examples in your research that shows what happens when, let's just say, a set of twins who are divided, let's say via adoption, and they come back together later, and you have found some very just, I mean, startling similarities. And one of the set of twins you mentioned are the Jim twins. Can you talk about who they are and what you found?
Well, the Jim twins, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, were separated at birth and adopted by different families who lived about 40 miles apart in Ohio. And when they were reunited at the age of 39, they both showed some amazing similarities to one another. For example, they both used to bite their fingernails. They both described a mixed headache syndrome that developed as adolescents. They described their symptoms in exactly the same way. They both put on 10 pounds as adults inexplicably. They both married Linda, divorced Linda, married Betty. And then one divorced Betty and married Sandy. So I guess the other Betty was a little nervous at that point.
Right?
Seeing the future. They both were into woodworking. They both drove light blue Chevrolets. They vacationed in the same 3-block strip of beach in Florida. They both worked as sheriffs and part-time at McDonald's. So they had a lot of similarities. And in fact, that is the study that in 1979 launched the famous Minnesota study of twins raised apart at the University of Minnesota. And I was very privileged to join that study team in 1982, several years after it had been in progress. I was a new PhD. This was my first job as a postdoctoral fellow. And I didn't meet the Jim twins till many years later, but I met many, many fascinating, wonderful pairs of twins along the way.
And you'd also talked about a set of Colombian twins who were accidentally switched in the hospital,
Right.
raised apart, two sets, come back together. And again, can you talk about what the results you found with that set of twins? That was
Right.
also interesting.
Right. I'll give you a little background first for people who don't know the story, although I lay it out in my book, Accidental Brothers. So, two pairs of male identical twins were born a day apart, one set in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and the other in a tiny village about 100 miles to the north. One of the babies up north was very sick, so when he was a day old, his grandmother brought him on the bus to the better hospital in Bogota, and he remained there a week. And when an aunt went to pick him up and bring him home, she was accidentally given the wrong baby. So this split two sets of identical male twins. And this was very rare because you had the same unrelated pair in different environments, one unrelated pair in Bogota and one unrelated pair up in the north. Now, this was an unusual situation, and it shows that extreme environments can overwhelm individual differences. What I mean by that is that the pairs of the two boys in Bogota were more like each other than they were like their twins. Same for the boys up in the north. Why? Because the boys in the city had access to education, culture, resources, things of that sort. The boys in the north didn't go past the 5th grade because their parents couldn't afford it. And that was very typical. They worked as farmers for a long time. So when they discovered this mistake, they were 25. And when I heard the story, I knew I was going there to study them. And I found that while there were many personality attributes that were very much alike, the boys, one of the pairs of twins was very outgoing, extroverted. The other pair, a little more, I wouldn't say reserved, but just a little less outgoing, perhaps. Great dancers, by the way, the reserved pair. The other pair tried. They weren't quite as good, but they did a good job. But the point is that their personalities were very much the same, but their intellectual skills, of course, were largely affected by the fact that the two boys up in the north had not had a complete education.